Welcome to the BrightWord Books podcast. BrightWord is a leading platform for diverse storytelling, where voices from all backgrounds can share their unique narratives and connect with readers from around the world. Follow our regular podcast updates, where we strive to foster a literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature.
Welcome, everyone, to the BrightWord Books podcast, where we shine a light on authors and stories that captivate, inspire, and endure. In today's episode, we are honored to welcome Dr. Gary Kidney back, actually. He's the author of the gripping historical spy novel, The Eagle Scout Picture, set against the perilous backdrop of the World War II. This is a suspenseful tale that follows a young American agent, Frederich, who's... there's a lot of contention around his name, or more about how to pronounce his name, also known as Zelly, Zellner, as he navigates the treacherous landscape of Nazi Germany in a deadly game of deception and survival. With a rich background in education, technology, and creative writing, Dr. Kidney brings out an extraordinary depth and realism to his debut novel, blending authentic history with thrilling fiction. Stay with us as we uncover the inspiration behind the Eagle Scout Picture and explore the stories, the high stakes of those stories as well, the themes of loyalty, courage, and resilience in wartime. So that being said, Mr. Gary, how are you? Hi, hello, welcome.
Hello, I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
I'm very glad to have you. How's the family?
Doing well.
That's good. That's good to hear. So the first thing I want to ask you, now that you've had 2 podcast appearances and maybe more feedback from readers, how has your perspective on the Eagle Scout Picture changed, if it did at all?
It really hasn't changed, but it's strengthened. I'm hearing good feedback from people who like the depth of history in the book. They tell me it's a page turner, that they can hardly find a place to lay it down. And I think to a writer, that's probably about the best praise that one could receive.
Yes, it is the best praise one can receive. I mean, it's the thing about writing, it's a very interesting medium, because the feedback you don't get immediately. It functions like a one-way conversation where you're speaking to every reader, but no reader can speak to you, basically. Unless you meet them, obviously in person, that's when you get the feedback. But to get that kind of praise,
I'm getting quite a bit of that.
Yeah, see, so to get that kind of praise, for that line to function, to go from you to them and then from them to you, it's a very, very special kind of praise. And now, looking back, is there a scene or a moment in the book that maybe resonated with you differently today than when you first wrote it, because that may be something that got mentioned to you a lot?
Yes. So there is a quote in the book. How can any relationship be based on something so false? And so you're talking about the spy who is trying to build relationships, a girlfriend, friends in Nazi Germany.
Right.
And he wonders how he can do that based on something so false. And that has resonated with an awful lot of people. I've heard feedback saying this is really the first book they've ever read of a spy story where the spy has friends and a girlfriend in the country that he's spying on. And I think that comes from the fact that the hero here is young, starting off at 17, going into the country at 18, and staying in the through 25. You know, people at that age are wanting human connections.
Right.
When you plop an old guy like me into a spy situation, you know, we can get along pretty well on our own. We don't need that kind of camaraderie and human time. So that's one of the things that people have been telling me about, and it's made me glad that I chose to set the scene in that fashion.
Right.
To make this spy want human companionship.
And that's what I found most interesting, actually, about the way you structure the story, is that usually there is this romanticization of sort of like the one man soldier. And so even the spy is like the cool spy who does everything by his own. And, but you chose to go a different route with that, and you chose to give the spy more personality and more humanity, other than just this, one man soldier, very cool, very successful and everything. But why would you do that? That's what I'm curious about.
In the thriller and spy market, there's an awful lot of Jack Reachers. One person doing it all. And I decided that I wanted to do something completely different. I wanted to head off in a direction where it gave me opportunities, I think, to write more moral dilemmas for the character.
Right.
Because how do you feel when you are deceitful for the people that like you and you like them?
Yes, I see that. I see that a lot, and because what it reminded me of is a movie that I quite liked. It's called The Man from Uncle. Uncle is like acronym, and it's the story of two spies. They are also during like the Cold War, I think,
Yes.
but sort of also from the Allies, and one is, I think, is Russian, and one is American, but they have to work together, and that added a whole new layer to the story itself because it wasn't just a one-man show. And and I think the way you've done that is actually very, very inspiring, and also it shows that the story can be compelling and it can be cool. You can have your cool character, but at the same time, that cool character it's not mutually exclusive for them to be either human or cool. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think you achieved that pretty well.
Right, and it gives an awful lot of opportunity for emotion to enter into the story.
Right.
And many of the thriller spy novels kind of are with that.
And now I want to ask you, because besides this, you've tackled some heavy themes through Zelly's story. How has writing this book impacted you personally, or maybe emotionally over time?
Writing from a Nazi perspective took me to an emotional place that I didn't want to go. And I don't know that I would want to go down that rabbit hole again. It was a really challenging thing. I guess the only way I could say is I had to kind of do a split personality and talk about things that I would not normally have done. So right from the beginning of the book, in the first, our hero, Zelly, or Fred, or Frederich, if you pronounce it in the German, is asked to do some things that an American would probably never consider doing. And the stakes are now life and death. Do them as you're ordered to do, or face the consequence of that process. And going into that spot, having my American be pretending to be a Nazi, and having to write a Nazi character, a Gestapo officer who is searching for him in a cat and mouse game, really in a spot that I lots of sleepless nights as I'm dreaming Nazi dreams.
And so that was sort of like the impact on you, because you had to maybe embody some characteristics that they are not true to yourself, but you had to embody them just for the sake of writing and making that bad or evil character seem as real as it can be. But this also has an effect on the readers themselves. So when talking to these readers of yours, did any of them maybe reach out with a personal story or interpretation that maybe left a strong impression on you?
So early readers of this, I chose to give 3 Germans who had served in the war an early copy of the book for their feedback. And their feedback was really interesting. One of them said, I think you've caught the German culture of the time better than any other war book I've read. And so that really made me happy with what was happening in that process. And so I kept poking them for, are there things that I got wrong? Are there things that I did wrong? Because I really want this to be very historically accurate. And they were saying, no, we were really happy with the way you depicted things. You made the bad things look bad and the good things look good.
See, that's one of the praises that you don't normally get unless you're a writer, because if someone is on a play, the feedback is very immediate. You hear people clapping, you hear people booing, you hear people even gasping, because in the story you wrote, you want them to gasp. But if someone is gasping while reading a book, you're at home watching TV, the person is in Germany, time hour difference, you have no idea how they're reacting to your book until they speak to you. And so this praise is very interesting.
And quite often, when you do get the reaction, you get a reaction on one thing or two things. There was a whole bunch of other emotions in the roller coaster that they went through in reading the book that they don't mention.
Right. And so now, and these people, I'm interested in the age demographic. Did you have any teens that talked to you about the book?
Yes, I don't market to teens. The line that I wanted to stay at.
Please
there
continue.
is some sex in the book. Yeah, and so the thing I don't want them to misunderstand is, in those days, sex was not nearly as consensual as it is today.
Right.
And so you have the Lebensraum movement, in which Nazi officers are actually having sex for enjoyment with local women, not prostitutes, but people who are forced into the process.
Right.
And that was perfect for the time. It was the way it was. But I would hope that young teens would not pick up on that these days. And so
right.
I think I can do that too. So if I had to work with a young teen in this process, or with a school, I think there are things like that I would like to bring out as a way of a cautionary tale to say, things in history are not always the same as things are now.
Right.
And the vice versa of that is true. You can't take modern morality and play it back into a historical context and understand things in the same fashion. So one of the first feedbacks I got from a teen reader is, in the opening chapter of the book, there are two people sneaking into Germany. One is Zelly, the main character, and another is Vinny, his handler in the days of spying. And they're sleeping together in a bed, in a Pullman on a train. And so the first thing that the boy did after reading that opening scene is he said, they're gay.
Right.
Well, not really in that historical time period.
Right.
Lots of people, nobody grew up in a 4-bedroom house.
Right. What we think of as moral or immoral has always changed. I mean, even you bring up homosexuality, the kid thinks, oh, that's maybe they're gay, but even being gay, how it was in the 70s, 60s, 80s, 90s, today, in modern day, is different from country to country, from time to time. So morality is this ever-shifting thing that is affected by culture, by what is happening, the events that are going on and everything. And so how do you try to capture that?
Well, while we're talking about schools, one of the things that I think I have to say is, I think we teach history wrong. It should be his story or her story. And instead, what we get are dates and names and battles and who won. We don't really go into the stories. And my interest in World War II has always been these personal stories, like the one I tell in this book. And when you understand those personal stories, you see both the effect of history, the effect of change, and the effect of how morality is deemed different in different cultures. It becomes very obvious to you. And so I think we need to do more of that. Who won the battle is not nearly as important as how the people in that battle suffered and lived day to day.
See, it's interesting you say that because outside the unconsensual sexual relations that were happening, if a school or a book club, say, but I'm more focused on a school, if they asked you to speak to students about the book, what would you say would be the key lesson or takeaway you want to emphasize that they take home?
Well, I would probably start off with that fact to say the morality in different cultures and at different times has changed. We can't measure the morality of somebody else in a different culture or in a different time based upon today's modern standards.
Mm-hmm.
And when you understand that, you end up with a much deeper understanding of what history is like. But
Right.
you also have to understand that everything that's happening in the world today, even that shifting morality, is all based upon the history. If you know history,
Right.
what's going on in Russia and the Ukraine and Iran and Israel is not surprising. It's just the way they are. And it often comes out of the history of those countries and the morality of those countries.
And so back to the book, has writing the Eagle Scout picture, has it influenced your style or your own voice is sort of like how you address things?
So it's made me wanting to stay in the genre that Eagle Scout picture is. So there will be sequels to the Eagle Scout picture.
Right.
Zelly is going to end up being a spy for many years after this book. And I'm going to continue on. One thing I learned out of doing it that's impacted not so much voice, but style, is many people have told me that they have loved the historical detail in the Eagle Scout picture. And so I intend to continue that into the future writings that I do. I will write with as much historical detail and accuracy as I possibly can.
That's good because when you it's all right. When talking to this goes back to why I asked you about the teens, because when you get feedback from people who fought in the war or maybe were affected by directly affected by the effects of the war because they were born just shortly after, you can sort of those people understand it more because they've seen it or they felt it. But years and years and decades after, when you're talking about today's teens, it's such a distant memory that it's almost like a movie to them. It doesn't even seem real. Like those people are not truly real people to them because they don't know someone who died in the war personally and they've dealt with that person, interacted with them, and now they're gone and they can never see them again. They don't feel that emotional toll that comes with being very close to that period which you write about. Now, have there been ideas or maybe subplots that didn't make it into the final version, but you're still thinking about, and maybe you think you should explore them in the next books?
So there are two counterplots that got left out of the book. The first one is that Zelly arrives in Germany on the opening page of the book. But he's been trained for 9 months. He tells you that, but he doesn't tell you much about that training. That comes from advice that I got from an editor. The book was actually 120 pages longer than it is now.
Oh.
And the editor said, we ought to start this when he arrives in Germany. And so I cut out the first 120 pages. You see his recruitment, you see his training, you see his problems with Bald Bart, the guy that he kills while he's in training. And I left it out. So people have been telling me now, why don't you take that 120 pages and package it up and put it on the website and let us read it when we want it? It doesn't have to be part of the book.
Right.
And so I may do something like that in the process. Another piece that was left out is I did not do scenes of Vinny, the second spy in this process, in his investigation of the atomic bomb. You hear about him doing it, but you don't hear it. You don't read the actual event. And so one person asked me, why don't you write Vinny's story up for that? And I said, I don't think I can do that because I don't know that anybody wants to buy a book where the hero dies in the end.
I mean, I can see your point, and we covered sort of like what did you leave out, but what about what stayed in those scenes that say, what have you maybe you found yourself rewriting a lot because you felt it was very crucial to the story and you need to get it as right as you can get it?
So when I wrote the book in its first draft, it was in first person, Zelly's point of view only. And so I decided I want to move it to third person, and I wanted to create the antagonist, Stengler, the Gestapo agent in the process. And so his scenes in the book, now not quite as many pages as Zelly has, but still a significant amount, required an awful lot of rewriting.
Right.
I mentioned earlier times that I had Nazi dreams. Well, it was in the writing of Stengler and the parts in the book that did that.
Right.
And that required an awful lot of writing.
So,
but I think the story is so much stronger with them there. Because you get to see the plot developing from both angles.
See, that's what I was about to say, because it's the duality that makes it more interesting, because you can sort of view it from two different perspectives, and then there is your own perspective that you layer in from the top and judging from your standpoint with your own character, personal characteristics, and then you sort of you're projecting yourself back into the book, and that makes it very, very interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons why your readers told you that it's page turner, they can't find a point where they can stop, because at every point they're still projecting themselves into the story, and they want to know what's going to happen to the story as much as they want to know what is going to happen to them, because they're seeing themselves in those shoes. Now, if the medium had changed, if someone would offer you a deal for an adaptation for a film, TV show, audio drama even, is that something you think you would be open to?
Oh, I would love it. I think this is the book is written in a very cinematic fashion, and I think it would lend itself well to probably a limited series, about 8 episodes. I think it's too complex to tell in a 2-hour standard movie frame, but a limited series I think would go well. So if there's anybody out there who would like a good book to adapt for cinema, I would be open to what they would have to offer.
Right. I mean, if I hear someone even remotely mentioning making a movie, I would slam you to the door and tell them, hey, stop it right there. I got something for you. Because I genuinely believe that it can be an interesting one. I agree with you that because you're trying to offer a different perspective on what a spy can be and the kind of relationships they can have, it's not something that you would compress into just 2 hours. It would be nice if it's like an episodic thing and you get to explore and flesh out every character and every relationship those characters have. Now, if you had creative control, I'm still stuck on this. If you had creative control over a screen adaptation, what element of the story would you insist that it remains unchanged?
So I would have to say the young main character has to remain unchanged. So I self-published this book, but when I was looking for agents, the thing that told me not to get an agent and go ahead and self-publish it was a letter that I got from a female agent, and she wrote me, "We really love this book. We love the high stakes, we love the plot, we love the emotion, but we want you to rewrite it with a female protagonist." That's what is buying books these days. And that idea was just so impossible to do. A female in Germany at this time would never have been able to do the things that the male character has done.
Right, right,
And there is much drama in writing a spy book about Hitler's cook or Hitler's maid. And that's about all that women were allowed to do in those days. You were a
right.
homemaker, you were a baby maker.
Right.
And so that I would insist. You've got to have a young boy in this process in that. Other than that, I have learned so much from other people, especially my editor, who made this book much stronger. So I would be open to considering adaptations that move things in a little different direction than is here.
Right.
But I think that Mr. Zelly Zellner has to stay.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I mean, a female spy would stick out like a sore thumb during those times because you're trying to aim for historical accuracy as you're writing this book.
Yes.
Yes. If it was a little bit more, if it leaned more fictional, then you can allow and you can have like suspension of disbelief and allow that a woman would be there because you're leaning more towards fiction and you're allowing yourself to believe so. But if you're being historically accurate with everything else and then the main character is historically inaccurate, then it would create a dissonance and a disconnect for the reader. So I absolutely agree with you. And shouts out to your editor. I'm a published author myself, and I know how much work the editors do. They are the unsung heroes of every successfully published book, and they don't get the credit they deserve. Now, do you envision the Eagle Scout picture becoming a larger universe or series, even loosely connected? Do you see yourself writing about other characters that are sort of like far in the distance but still connect?
So I mentioned earlier that Zelly is going to stay as a spy and come back in sequels, and I've already finished one. And the second one is probably within 40 pages of being finished. And so you'll probably see sequels coming out about once a year, probably in February, which is the original publication date for the Eagle Scout picture. Things will change, but the role that Zelly plays as a spy is going to continue on. The second book will be set in 1946 after the war. And it will be really the start of the Cold War. So instead of it being spying on Nazis, it's going to end up being spying on Soviets, spying on Russians.
Very interesting.
The third book will happen in 1956 at the Budapest, in Budapest at the Hungarian Revolution against the Soviets. And the fourth book, should I live long enough to get there, will happen in 1968. Backed by the Vietnam War and the solidarity movement in Poland that eventually deposes the Soviet Union.
Right, right. And what's something you're exploring now in the book that you're writing that you've might not have explored earlier in your career?
So I'm playing a little bit right now with a young adult story. As in this case, I like to kind of find things that come from unexpected or unique perspectives. And so I'm interested in autism. And so I have a story that's been plodding around in my mind for a while about a young autistic boy and what it's like for him to go through teenage years, high school. And it's hard to find autistic main characters. You find parents who deal with autistic children, find that kind of thing. You find stories about families that have an autistic child within it. But I don't know that anybody has ever really written from the autistic point of view except Mark Haddon in his book, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And so I'm looking for something like that, but for a higher functioning autistic, one who self-aware and understands a little bit more of what's going on, but still has problems with the social aspect of communicating that.
Right, right, right. I mean, autism is a spectrum, and you can sort of locate the, the placement of where in the spectrum you want your character to be. How necessary do you think is the autistic perspective is necessary for the writing and for it to come off as genuine and true to the experience?
Yes. So the goal is to do that. Far too much of what's been done in film and television for autism has been played by people who aren't autistic.
Right. True.
They're acting that way. The Good Doctor is an example of that.
I was about to mention that.
Show. And while it teaches something about autism, it doesn't have quite the authentic feel that I would like it to have. And so going inside the autistic person, which they try to do with, I kind of think, special effects in that television show, is something that I would like to explore more about. How the autistic person deals with relationships. Like in the book of Eagle Scout Picture, we've got relationships that I think are important to deal with. That will happen in the book on autism.
Right. And speaking of underrepresented characters and people and their conditions, are there any lesser known historical moments that maybe you're passionate about bringing life to in the near future books?
So I have several of those that some of them are already on my website at www.garykidney.com.
Right.
When I find an interesting story, particularly out of World War II, I'll write it up, but I write it as history rather than historical fiction. I want to stick true to exactly what happened in the history. So my website has an article about a man who makes a movie in Nazi Germany and then gets tried for war crimes based upon making a movie. An interesting tale.
Very.
About Viet Harlan. That's the name of the director who does it. And he's doing it under the guise of a charge from Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda ministry. And so that writing that historical piece was great. And then on the other American side, I have an article about Jeanette Rankin, who was the only person in Congress to vote no about going to war with Japan. It was political suicide. She lost her seat in the next election simply because she took a stand. But I'm proud of her for taking that stand, and her stand was really very pacifist and really very feminist. She said, "I am not going to send my boys someplace that I can't go."
That's powerful. That is very powerful.
And so there's another one that I'm interested in. I'm probably going to write up next. Most people don't know that the last shot fired in anger of World War II was fired in 1957. There was a holdout a squad of Japanese on an island in the Philippines called Lubang. They had been killing people, killed 30 of them after the war was over. And they finally surrendered in 1957. They didn't believe the propaganda. They didn't believe the war was over. All of their commanders had gone. And so this man stuck it out as a Japanese in a cave on Lubang until 1957. And the only way he would surrender was when they brought his commander back from Japan. He had turned into a bookseller back in Tokyo.
Wow.
The Americans got him, brought him back, and he told the men that the war was over and to surrender, and he did. in 1957. Think about that dedication to country.
Yes. I mean, from 45 to 57. And that whole time, to explore the psychology of this guy and to sort of like put yourself in his shoes. I mean, whether you agree with him morally or it doesn't matter at this point, because it already happened. Whatever happened happened. But just that aspect of being so loyal that you reject any notion that the war is over for years. This is not like a month or 2 months after you come to know it. And for another command, I mean, this is truly powerful, and I hope to see you right about this. This is an incredible one.
So the lesson from that is there are stories throughout history that no one knows and no one has ever heard about.
Right.
That would really be illuminating to modern times if we ended up learning.
Speaking of lessons, I want to close it out with this one. What do you hope readers will carry with them long after finishing the Eagle Scout picture, especially in today's world?
Yeah, I kind of hinted at that early. The perspective that the world today and all that's wrong with it and all that's right with it come from this history. And we need to learn what that history is and act appropriately in that history. For instance, one of the things I do when I'm on a book tour is I'll do some little quizzes. Trivial pursuit-like game with the audience, asking them who won World War II for the Allies. And the answer when I'm here in the United States is always America. The US won the war. And then I say, the biggest battles of World War II in Europe, Americans were nowhere near.
True.
Those Stalingrad, Kursk, the battle for Berlin, Americans were nowhere near.
Right.
The war was actually won by the Soviet Union, but we don't acknowledge that because it's not the strong aspect of the country that we would like to see done.
True.
And so understanding those perspectives, understanding why the Soviet Union for years in the Cold War didn't trust America is easy enough to accomplish when you actually look at what happened in history, and even more important than what happened, why it happened. Because the one thing that doesn't change is motivation.
The push.
Yeah, people are motivated by the same things now that they were back then.
True. Money, power, that kind of thing.
For millennia. And when you understand the motivations are the things that stay, you can see what the motivations are today, how growing out of the history of what happened in the past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can exchange silver for gold, for petrol, for rice, for shells on the beach. It's always value attached to something, power for a king or a shaman or a president. It's always power. That's the motivator. So as you look through history, you can find the consistent things. They just shapeshift into something else that makes you think maybe this is different, but really it's not. And I think it's
not.
Yeah. Well,
so that would be the takeaway that I hope people will remember. They'll probably, it's not a lesson that I lay in the book in a strong preacherly fashion, but it's something that I think people need to think about deriving from history.
I absolutely agree with you.
Help them do that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up today's conversation on the BrightWords podcast. An absolute heartfelt thank you to Dr. Gary Kidney for joining us and sharing the journey behind the Eagle Scout picture and some of the untold war stories. I mean, I'm very, very interested in what you've said that the stories that you mentioned that not a lot of people know about, if any. And yes, I mean, the book that is out right now, still a riveting blend of historical fact and spy fiction that brings World War II espionage to life with extraordinary power. We know this because we have the reviews. people from Germany, people who fought in the war, and they said, this is historically accurate. So if you're looking for a suspenseful, thought-provoking, as we learned today, thought-provoking read, filled with tension, action, and historical depth, The Eagle Scout Picture is available now on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. Again, thank you for tuning in. I want to say, again, thank you to Mr. Gary Kidney for not just illuminating our audience, but myself. I mean, I'm going to do so much research on what you've mentioned. And I'm so intrigued, and I cannot wait to read the works that you have in the future.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I will add at the end by saying this novel itself is an untold story. It is a story that was told to me by a man that I happened to meet on a beach in Galveston, and I decided to write it up.
See, this is the beauty of stories. This is the beauty of stories. Throughout human history, we have survived by telling stories to each other. Scientifically, I'm a biologist by specialty, and one of the things that you learn about is our biology is heavily affected by our environment, and our environment is heavily affected by how we describe it to each other. And the stories are very, very important. I'm glad we still have this. I'm glad we still have so many untold stories to tell. And I'm glad that we have people like you who do the due diligence and actually care about how they tell them. So thank you very much for that as well.
There's probably nothing more powerful in the world than story.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, keep turning the pages with BrightWord Books, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the BrightWord Books podcast, home of the literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss future episodes. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.